What is up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Steelers Hangover. I'm Daniel, alongside with me, as always, Shannon White. How's it going, my man? How you doing? How was your weekend?
Had a great weekend. It was actually my mother's birthday, and then the next day, well, the day before that was my brother-in-law's birthday. So yesterday we kind of just had a family gathering to celebrate, and it was really nice.
That's awesome, man. That's cool. I had my daughters with me this weekend as well, and we had a good time. It was a good weekend overall. The weather was pretty nice for the first time in a while too. Uh, but as the weather cleared, so have some of the views there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. As Art Rooney had his press conference, or it's not a press conference; it was more like a interview session with
Yeah.
some of the media guys there in Pittsburgh. And he talked about a few things. Some interesting quotes have been coming out. I haven't had the pleasure of seeing the entire thing, just kind of little break pieces of quotes here and there. But we wanted to talk about those. Let's start off first about Mike Tomlin. He says that they expect to extend him and that Matt Canada's firing was 100% Mike Tomlin's decision, and that Mike Tomlin is going to be 100% as the hiring of the OC. What are your thoughts on those three things there?
Well, the extension I think is a the extension kind of goes in with the OC and the past OC of Matt Canada. That's what concerns me. If Tomlin's 100% makes that decision, then they're saying that Tomlin hired Matt Canada, which I think was the most ridiculous hire that I can remember in the Steelers' tenure. That concerns me because Matt Canada he had no NFL experience. He was not NFL capable or caliber. So then that concerns me that they say that makes it sound like it was totally Tomlin's idea to bring him back last year, which was a huge error. And then to turn around and fire him in the middle of the season. And because Rooney come out and said that he thought that really impacted Kenny Pickett's development. I disagree with Rooney. I think that bringing Canada back impacted Pickett's development. So, again, we get different stories every time that they try to say who has responsibility on these decisions. So, I think the extension should be maybe 2 years added on to his 1 year left. And then if we don't see any changes, which I know we're going to talk about that coming up here, but the Rooney says they're tired of this Groundhog Day roller coaster that they're on. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. So in 3 years, they should definitely be able to make a decision one way or the other.
Well, that's interesting because Terrell Austin was, he got his contract. His contract was for 2 years.
Yep.
Now, I was thinking that maybe perhaps that's going to coincide with what Tomlin is going to get. And, that's only going to be adding a year to his current contract if that's the case. And does that impact a possible, decision from an offensive coordinator's perspective when deciding where he wants to go, the security of the head coach that's bringing him in? Because, the head coach goes, so does the staff most times. So, how do you see that? And do you see that being a possible hurdle in getting a really, really good offensive coordinator? Obviously they're going to be able to hire somebody and pick up someone, but getting one of those top tier guys that maybe has a couple of options, do you think that's going to affect their decision?
Well, if they only do a 1 year extension, that would, as you're saying, that would tie him to Terrell Austin, his extension, and it would give when you could tell your offensive coordinator, if it's somebody that has head coaching aspirations, you could say, as I originally thought, that maybe they would be the one to replace Tomlin when he finally walks away into retirement. So you might get a little bit better quality offensive coordinator that way. If he's looking at being the head coach of the most stable franchise in sports down the line. Like I said, there's just a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. I think Tomlin's waiting to sign an extension to see what happens with the offensive coordinator. And I believe that that's one of the reasons why you could look at it another way. You could look at it as Matt Canada wasn't really Tomlin's decision, and this time he wants to make sure that the offensive coordinator is his decision before he signs an extension.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. A couple of guys have come in, Arthur Smith being the one that's I believe most recently. Thomas Brown has also been interviewed. Is there, I think somebody else was on the list there, but I'm not sure.
It was Johnson, wasn't it? Is it Jared Johnson or?
I think so.
He was ex-quarterback. He played at Pittsburgh in 2012 or 2013.
Yeah. With a guy like Arthur Smith, though, a guy that has, he did more of a running game. He had more, or his expertise, in my opinion, was more in the running game. Coming as the offensive coordinator in Tennessee before being the head coach in Atlanta, and really having a drive with the, Henry out there in Tennessee. I'm not sure if that guy, kind of fits the bill with what the Steelers want to do offensively with the offensive coordinator. Art Rooney mentioned that they wanted a fresh approach, something different. It sounds like they want something new and innovating. Do you think that the offensive coordinator has been interviewed, or do you think that person is still not yet been interviewed with the Steelers?
Yeah, I don't think he's been interviewed yet. Arthur Smith is definitely not new and inventive or innovative. He is more old school. He's got a very, I'm going to say Todd Haley-like personality. He's rubbed some people the wrong way. Honestly, just looking at the guy, he looks kind of like I don't know, Mr. Potato Head or something. There's something about him. One thing about it would go in his contract that the dude must keep facial hair, because when he's clean shaven, he just doesn't, he looks like a villain in any of these 80s movies, because he just looks really punchable. But I'm not really a fan of that interview or that potential hiring. Somebody said it might help bring in Mike Munchak, who we'd all love to see come back. But I think that if Mike Munchak really wants to return to the NFL, he would be willing to do that with or without Arthur Smith. It kind of makes you hope Steelers really are interested in talking to Kubiak and or Greasy or somebody of that nature from the 49ers staff, because if you're wanting to get more innovative, you pretty much are looking at the Shanahan tree or the McVay tree. And, of course, they lost Robertson to Atlanta already. So, and I just didn't know if Kingsbury was a good fit at all. So I think the next OC still is out there, but he hasn't been interviewed yet.
I agree. And if he hasn't been interviewed, it's possibly because they're still coaching. So the possibilities of who that coach might be, it's starting to narrow down as far as who that is. And it does seem like it could be somebody that is on the staff of the 49ers. But I'm just curious. I don't know if they can or not, but can coaches meet during, between the Super Bowl and the championship? Because I know there's like a 2-week time frame.
They can meet virtually, if I'm not mistaken, up to the championship game. And now they cannot meet till after the Super Bowl. So the next 2 weeks is a black period.
Got you. See, I wouldn't know that.
Yeah, blackout.
Right. Yeah. So we won't find out then, until after the Super Bowl, if that's the guy that they want to go. Because I know that there's been situations before where positions were accepted during the playoffs, and you knew that the new OC, DC head coach somewhere else while they were still in the playoffs. So I wasn't sure if that could be something that can occur during this time, but maybe not. But with the offensive coordinator, and one of these guys being it, who do you think fits better, in your opinion, as far as the passing game option? I mean, I think that it's probably going to be Kubiak. I know Brian Greasy, he's been an ex, quarterback. He played the game, so he has that pedigree as well. But Kubiak, he comes from a family of coaches, right? His father was a coach.
Yes.
So if in your opinion, which one would you prefer out of the two?
Well, it's funny. Kubiak's father was a player as well, and then, of Greasy, of course, was John Elway's backup. So we had an article today on our SCN site that was really informative for a lot of people. If you're like me, I follow the players and all, but I really don't follow the coaches that much. So the only thing I knew about Kubiak was, I was more familiar with his father, and then with Greasy the same way. Well, of course, his dad was a former NFL Super Bowl winning quarterback, and then Greasy won with the Broncos behind Elway. So I knew him as players more than I do as coaches. But I think Kubiak would be the best option. I think he's going to be highly sought after. As soon as this Super Bowl's over, I think you're going to see a lot of interest. But again, Pittsburgh is a different animal when it comes to trying to recruit coaches and everything. And just one of the way they treat them, the potential for advancement, in a situation like this, depending on what happens with Tomlin down the road. Now they don't, I think they pay their head coach. I'm not sure how their pay is comparable to the rest of the league at coordinators. Mm-hmm. I figure it's probably been pretty low on purpose because I believe the Rooneys hired Canada and the Rooneys hired Fitchner and the Rooneys hired Haley, guys that were not in high demand for, like, say, with Haley due to attitude and, how hard he was to work with. And then Fitchner was kind of like Ben's the offensive coordinator and you're just there as his assistant. And of course, Canada had no NFL experience. So I think they made some decisions based on keeping costs down.
I wouldn't be surprised. One big decision as far as, in my opinion, keeping costs down was when they signed Mitch Trubisky. He was signed because he was willing to accept a lower payment. Yeah. Or, he was one of the lower paid quarterbacks that was supposed to be starting. And, I think that's evident that the Steelers do kind of take some shortcuts in certain places, so with that being said, I think that there's probably more likely that Brian Greasy could end up being the guy. I think that Kubiak is probably going to get a lot of consideration when he goes. Yeah. And, when it comes to the whole pay thing, I think that he might end up getting somebody to give him a bag over Greasy. And I can see the Steelers kind of taking what's left and Brian Greasy, that is, which I don't think is a bad option. I think he'd be suitable, and I think he'd be a fine offensive coordinator if it ends up following that way.
Well, the thing is it's one thing to say, well, we're tired of this roller coaster we're caught on, or this, it ain't even roller coaster. It's a merry-go-round because nothing changes. It's just they even kill. And if you're really tired of that, and I know that most of the Steeler Nation is, then, you need to pay. You need to, there's no salary cap on coaches. So, get a full staff, which the Steelers have the smallest staff in the league, and also pay these guys to improve the quality, and then you'll improve the product on the field as well, I believe.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, you get what you pay for. I mean, that's been a saying that's been out there for as long as I can remember. It's probably been there before me. Yep. And, same thing is the truth here. You kind of cheap out on the offensive side or in the coaches' positions. Don't be surprised when, the depth doesn't work for the Steelers, because the stars and the starters, they have a natural ability to do some things. But once, if there's an issue or an injury and the depth comes in, that's where you really see the coaching aspect of, is this a good coach or not? Is it a big drop off? Then it's more on the player. If it's okay and they're able to do okay, then that's a pretty darn good coach. Speaking of coaches, and we mentioned Matt Canada and his firing in the middle of the season. The quote was, I believe it's that, let me see, it was firing OC in the mid-season likely didn't help Kenny Pickett's development. Do you think there's any regret there in firing Matt Canada mid-season?
Well, I think it's and I think Rooney's know it. I think Tomlin knows it. I know the players know it. The regret was bringing Canada back. That was the huge mistake. And, you can't have real growth in that type of offense. The great thing about Mason Rudolph, it being a 6-year veteran, he sat behind Big Ben for so many years. and he learned so much. And you seen when he come in, he understood. I've got to make these reads quickly, advance through my progressions quickly. He'd been part of at least a NFL caliber offense earlier in his career. He sure wasn't last year, and so he was way farther along in his development, and it made a massive difference. But yeah, the I don't think it impacted Pickett getting rid of him at the end of the year, because if anything, that's when Pickett got hurt. He didn't get to really benefit from Canada's absence. So the real mistake was bringing Canada back in the first place.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that was a mistake as well. I think the writing was on the wall, and regardless of what was going around him, it didn't seem like he was the coordinator that was able to maximize the ability of the players. And I think that's what you kind of have to do when you're in the coaching position.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being said, we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. I'm glad you mentioned the quarterback and Mason Rudolph, because when we get back, we're going to talk about the quarterback position and the comments left or made by Art Rooney referencing the quarterback position on the YouTube side. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back. Welcome back to the Hangover. I'm Daniel. Alongside with me, as always, is Shannon. Today, we're talking about Art Rooney and his interview session that he had with media there in Pittsburgh, referencing the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But before we get into it, I wanted to ask you, do you have anything coming out on SteelCurtainNetwork.com, your one-stop shop for all your Steelers news and coverage?
Well, there's a lot of things I want to write about. And again, like I said last week, still waiting on this offensive coordinator. It looks like it might be 2 weeks. They might already have something lined up with, at least interviews already scheduled, but they can't talk and do anything until after the Super Bowl. So, right now I'm trying to. Last week I was talking about the first article was the center position, and now you had to have strength up the middle and leadership in the center of your offensive line, something that all four Final Four participants had. Well, then later in the week, I wrote about the inside linebacker position, which we saw that the teams, all four of them had strong inside linebackers. The 3-4s had a true middle linebacker. Mm-hmm. And so this week, for the next 2 weeks, I guess I'm going to be trying to, again, more lessons and how the Steelers could follow the example of these two teams in the Super Bowl. Their stability is very impressive. The way they, from the offensive to the defensive creativity, was top of the league, has been for a while. With the 49ers have been really good for that was 3 straight NFC championship games. And I think Mahomes has only missed 2 in his career. He's been in the championship game every year. So you want that stability. You have to be able to evolve, which is what the next article is about. Is you look at the Kansas City Chiefs when Mahomes first came on the scene, and they had Tyreek Hill and all these other weapons. They were just blowing people out. But now if you watch them, they don't have as many skill position weapons. Now they win with a very efficient offense and a top 5 defense. Kansas City's defense is very strong. I don't know if they're paying attention, but Kansas City, especially in the second half of these games, are shutting teams out. And so they've evolved from an offensive juggernaut to a more well-balanced team. And that's what you have to do. Like the Steelers were all defense at the beginning of the Steel Curtain. But people didn't realize that towards the end of the Steel Curtain, they were more of a high-flying offense because the defense started to age. And guys like me, Joe Green, and LC and all, they weren't the same in the last Super Bowl. But that evolution allowed them to win 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. So the Steelers know all this. They've forgotten some of it. But hopefully Mr. Rooney realizes it, and he has enough of his dad and his brother in there that he'll be able to turn this around.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to all those things that you're going to be doing for us on the website, and also on Wednesday. You have the Pump Your Brakes, correct? That
Yes,
airs at what time again?
8 o'clock now. We moved it up 30 minutes, and so it's 8 o'clock on Wednesdays.
It's been going pretty good, man. I've been enjoying it. I've been watching it on the replay. You guys don't want to miss it. Make sure you guys tune in. If
It's
you're
a
on the
lot of
YouTube
fun.
side, yes, if you're on the YouTube side, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. That way you're notified of all the content that we do. But back into the conversation. So Art Rooney had some quotes that I felt were a little bit interesting. When referencing the quarterback position, I think that there's been a little bit of a theme in his end of year interviews, going back to when the Steelers drafted Najee Harris. He talked about emphasizing the running game and that being a huge part of the offense and moving forward. He continued that, throughout with until Broderick Jones was drafted. Now, this time, I felt that his topic that he wanted to stay on was the quarterback position. And, a lot of people have a lot of questions there. The first one is Kenny Pickett, QB1. How confident, are the fans that he's going to be, he can be QB1? How confident are the Steelers that he can be QB1? Where do you feel the Steelers are and where you are on that question of Kenny Pickett being QB1 going into 2024?
Well, I think if Mr. Rooney's honest and Mike Tomlin's honest and Steeler Nation's honest, we have no idea. His rookie year, he come in to a situation that was just like be a game manager, protect the football, and they played a easier schedule in the second half, got on a roll, made some positive plays to win. He showed some clutch ability. We've seen that, and we know he studies and he puts in the time, but that's all you really learn. This was the year that you really wanted to see what you had. And I said before the season started, it was the most important thing for the Steelers this year is they had to figure out what they had in Kenny Pickett. Because I know they don't want to do what they did from Bradshaw to Ben and have that long stretch of a quarterback holding them back. And, they made it AFC championship games during that time. People don't think about that. They don't realize. But you had guys leading you like a Cliff Stout. You had a, Cordell Stewart. You had a Neil O'Donnell. You didn't have the man at quarterback, and you really, the common knowledge is you need that. So right now, I would say that if you look at the NFC championship game, you had Jared Goff, who was the first player taken in his draft. But 2 years ago, the Lions didn't even know he was thrown into that Matt Stafford deal. And the Lions they thought he might be the bridge guy till they found their next guy. Well, he led them to the NFC championship game yesterday. So you're never really sure. Then you have Brock Purdy, who was Mr. Irrelevant. And, being on a championship caliber team, that's what he come into. He has really progressed, and he's played well in these playoffs. And now he's got him in the Super Bowl. So sometimes you get lucky, call it dumb luck, whatever. But the Steelers are not there as a franchise. They do not have that kind of roster. And they learned absolutely nothing this year, in my opinion, if anybody really is being honest, at what they have at quarterback. It makes sense for a 6-year veteran to look like a 6-year veteran and be more composed. And he had nothing to lose. And he come in and he had confidence. And his teammates fed off of that. And they all love playing with him. And he's also a good guy off the field, as we've learned through the years. And is well deserving of an opportunity to compete for a starting position. And you've already got Pickett under contract. So you bring, Pickett, he's coming back regardless. And you want him to actually have an opportunity to see what he can do in a competent offense, which the Steelers haven't had for 2 years. So I honestly, I can't say yay or nay about Kenny Pickett because I have no idea.
For me, I think that, first off, we'll start off with what Mason and excuse me, and his leadership. And kind of what you touch on what you were saying there at the end. One thing, he had an interview here recently, and one of the things that was disclosed in that interview is that he was one of the guys that was part of, they called it the Breakfast Club. It was him, Marquise Pouncey, Ramon Foster, Al Villanueva, all of the guys that were, the offensive linemen, from back in the day, some of those core group of leaders that the Pittsburgh Steelers used to have and used to depend on, on the offense back in the day. Mason still has that. He went through that. He has that within him. So I think that as a leader, and that's one of the things that was said about him, by some of the players around him, that he led the Pittsburgh Steelers. He showed, he was their leader. I think that spoke a lot. I think that the coaches mentioned about him being, looked at and they want him back. Art Rooney has mentioned in this state, in this press conference that they want him back. The players have as well. And when it comes to the confidence of Kenny Pickett, there was a couple of things that he said. Obviously, he's not going to badmouth Kenny and say, no, we have no confidence in him or any of those things. But he also said something like, when they were referencing on what he needed to improve, Rooney said, he has all those kind of intangibles. What I think we need from him is to continue to develop to be a quarterback who can read defenses quickly and get the offense into the best play when given the solution when he comes out of the huddle. So what that tells me is that the problem is not the play inside of the huddle. It's his decision-making and what he does once he's out of the huddle. Once he's on the line of scrimmage, what he's reading, what he's seeing isn't there, and it hasn't been there yet. Then he goes into and says, when it comes to Mason, I think Mason really showed, number one, I think he did a good show. I think he did show what we're capable of on an offense with the personnel that we have here right now. So basically saying that, he showed us what a good quarterback can do. And then finally, he also said, when they were referencing about the draft at the end, he said, I think we have a core group of players that we can compete with this group. And as I said, I think the biggest thing we need is quality play at the quarterback position. So when he's saying this over and over again, I really don't think that the confidence is as high as people think it is when it comes to Kenny Pickett. I feel that maybe, they are perhaps, saying the things that they have to say in the media. But he also didn't do his exit or the end of year interview with the media at the end of the year. People questioned why. Art Rooney mentioned in this conference that when he talked to Pickett, that they told him that they need better quarterback play from him. It didn't sound like it was probably the best of exit interviews. So I don't know. I don't think the confidence is as high. I think that they do want to get Mason Rudolph back. And if they do, I think that allows them to maybe perhaps get somebody in the draft without having to overpay and go too high. They got a guy that they can, they see as a bridge guy. I think that Art Rooney also indicated and said that they haven't seen Mason Rudolph's ceiling. A lot of folks will kind of come up and say, we know what Mason Rudolph is. He's a backup. And I'm talking about like mainstream media. He's a backup. He's always be a backup. Yeah, he hasn't even had an off season where he got all the first team reps. He hasn't had an offense, designed for him. So,
but if he comes back, and he might get other offers, better offers somewhere else.
That's true.
If he comes back, we don't know. That's why I don't talk about it a lot, because until we know who the offensive coordinator is, I don't know if he's a good fit or not. There's some offenses he needs a down the field passing attack. He doesn't need something like when we talked about Kingsbury. If they was going to bring in a guy like him, that's not a good fit for Mason. Right. Mason's more of a pocket passer. He's going to be more of a Big Ben offense type player. So, a few things. Mason's success was kind of like Pickett's success the year before. It was against bad defenses. Now he made more big plays, and it was a different looking offense because he had, Pickens, and he was hitting him, and it was a lot more down the field stuff. And that Pickett has not even come close to replicating that, even in the end of the year prior. But, Rudolph's a third round draft pick. who Art has always said he considered him a first-round talent. Now, not too many other people agree with that assessment. That was Art. We have to look back at Art talked about the running game for about 3 years in a row before anything really happened. He kept saying they got to improve the running game. He said that at the end of every season. And it took, they finally, I think, reached to take Najee Harris when there was better options. But I think Art finally said, you got to do something about this running game. So, I don't get too excited about any of that yet, as we talked about before the show, because I'm still waiting to see who this offensive coordinator is going to be. And then everything else will hopefully fall into place, because I want the offensive coordinator in place and then build the offense to his liking. So that means there's going to be a lot of changes on this offensive roster.
I agree. But when you look at who they brought in, Brown and Arthur Smith, as far as offensive coordinator positions, the quarterbacks that they have been around, such as the Tannehill when he was successful in Tennessee. I don't really see Bryce Young as being a guy that is going to be mobile. From what I understand, Thomas Brown was wanting C.J. Stroud, but I think that was the owner's decision to go with Bryce Young. Yeah, 100%. Well, first of many, I think, or one of many for the Carolina Panthers owner. But these are offensive coordinators, and even if you look at let me phrase it. Even if you look at the guys in San Francisco, Brock Purdy isn't a mobile quarterback. These are offensive coordinators, in my opinion, that can call an offense around what they have in Mason Rudolph. I mean, I think they also can do it around Kenny Pickett 100%, but I don't see that this being too far outside of his capabilities.
One quick observation, though. I don't know if you watched Brock Purdy at Iowa State. I think he had like 400 or 500 rushing yards. He really dominated the Big 12 there towards the end of his career. And then last night, there was multiple times that he got huge first downs, 13, 15-yard runs, where he just took off when, they looked at him like, oh, he's not that mobile. But he's a lot more mobile than people realize. He realizes his moneymaker, his bread and butter, is orchestrating that offense from the pocket. But when that pocket breaks down, Purdy is in these playoffs multiple times kept drives alive and made key first downs with his legs. So all I'm saying is Pickett is mobile, but Pickett doesn't make good decisions when to leave the pocket. He doesn't make good decisions where to leave the pocket. He wants to roll to the left, and then he rolls right into trouble. And so Purdy is well past that. I mean, he was a much more mobile quarterback in college, and he's improved from earlier in the year. If you remember, when they had their 3-game losing streak, Brock Purdy was getting blitzed a lot. When they had I think it was Samuel was out, and that really hurt their offense. And when he would get pressured, he would panic, and he kind of looked a lot like Pickett during that 3-game losing streak. And so we've seen that growth, but he's also in one of the best offenses in the NFL, surrounded by one of the most talented rosters. So again, I'm not saying that Pickett is or he isn't. I'm not saying Rudolph's the answer or he isn't. But until we get an offensive coordinator and we get a real offense in Pittsburgh, we don't have any answers.
Right. No, I don't disagree with you. I think that the offensive coordinator is going to be a pivotal role for the Pittsburgh Steelers moving forward, and their vision is going to be what the way that this team is going to be moving and going forward. I don't know. Like you mentioned, we mentioned multiple times that Mason Rudolph is a free agent. The Steelers have been open about wanting him to return. He has said, he loves the Steelers. He hasn't really said that he is coming back or not. He says that, some of those things are out of his hands. So at this point, he's not on the roster. So there is a chance he doesn't return. And
Didn't he say that they offered him? I mean, that they flat out told him they want him to come back. So, I mean, he knows that. If you look at the teams that are going to have openings, I don't see where he has a better fit.
I agree.
Now, again, it's going to depend on the offensive coordinator. That's why I'm sure that he wants the Steelers to make a decision on an offensive coordinator sooner rather than later, because everything will fall into place once we know that.
Right. And if they're going to get somebody that is truly, honestly, somebody that's going to compete. Did you see Kirk Cousins' asking price today?
Yeah. $45 million a year.
For 2 years, 90 million contract.
Yeah. That's that. So obviously he wants to go to somebody that he feels like he could compete for a Super Bowl now.
Yeah.
But they're going to do that. They got to have the roster, and then are they going to have that money for a franchise quarterback set aside, or are they going to have to weaken the roster to afford him? So I don't know how many spots he's going to have that he's going to be a perfect fit either.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree, and I think that's just a what you can expect. When you look at a quarterback that you're expecting to be a starter, maybe not 45 million, but, probably around the 20 million, maybe 15 million. If you have somebody who's expecting to come in to be a starter, when you have somebody like Mason Rudolph, I don't think he's going to attend or, be offered that amount of money. So you get less of that risk financially. You also have had him in house. So you're not giving some stranger money. You don't know, complete health history, things like that. I mean, how many times has a trade happen and then, or an acquisition happen, and then shortly after there's an injury or somebody goes on IR? Happens all the time. So, who you have, how healthy he is, and he's probably going to ask for, probably get less money, maybe not ask for less money. I don't think he's going to acquire more money than what they are asking. And so that's why I think that it's probably gonna happen. I think it probably will. But if it doesn't, where do you think they go? Do you think that they try to go to free agency, or do you think that they try to move up in the draft, or they go in, get somebody like Sam Darnold or something like that, and really not be a competition and just go in with Kenny Pickett as QB1 next year?
Well, as you just said, let's say they go with Kubiak or Greasy. Yeah. They've worked very closely with Sam Darnold. Mm-hmm. And Sam Darnold could come in. There's two reasons to do that. One, he knows their offense, so he can kind of be another teacher. He can be a guy who can decipher for the other quarterbacks in the room what they really want, because he's been going through these reps now for a good while, all season. So, if they get one of the 49ers candidates, I think Sam Darnold would make sense. And again, let him compete. It has to be an open competition, because if you try to just anoint one of these guys, some of the players sounded like they felt that way this year. And even last year when it was Trubisky, Pickett, and Rudolph. And a lot of them wasn't happy because they thought that Rudolph had the best camp. And I've heard that said since, the end of the Steelers season. So if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. Get the offensive coordinator, put in the right system, a more modern system, and then have an open quarterback competition and let the best man win and decide your pecking order that way. But Sam Darnold would make a lot of sense, especially if Rudolph gets a better deal somewhere else. It doesn't come back. They're going to really have to, as much as I hate to say it, Trubisky's under contract. And the Steelers, I don't know if they're going to be happy just dead money. I think it was $6-7 million if they do anything now. So there's always that possibility he could be that emergency 3, like Rudolph was all year this year till they actually give him a fair shot. But that being said, a lot of people are talking about them going for a 3rd or 4th round quarterback. I just really think they need to build the roster, solidify the foundations, use all these draft picks and free agent money to improve the roster and then add the quarterback. Because especially if you can bring back, say, Rudolph, bring in Darnold, and have Pickett, I would not be looking for anybody else this year. because you don't know what those guys are capable of, especially if they can bring in a better offensive coordinator like Kubiak or Greasy.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that, when you look at Darnold, the upside for me is George Pickens is already wearing 14, so we won't have a quarterback wearing 14.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever want to see that happen again.
No.
Uh, you know, I don't know how I feel about Sam Darnold, but I don't feel like he's going to be a guy that's going to take the Steelers where they want to go. Art Rooney talked about how the TJ Watts, the Cam Haywards, they're getting up there and they hadn't, reached where they want to go. And I think that, especially when you had the comments made by, Tomlin earlier, when he said that, one of his biggest regrets was not getting Marquise Pouncey a ring. You have these other guys that aren't going to about to get a ring. And I think that it would be doing them injustice to have the team that they have. I mean, I think that the wide receivers, they can be great. I think they can compete. They can be top 10-ish. I think that if they get a good quarterback behind them with good quarterback play, that they can really elevate those guys. I mean, George Pickens had a almost 200-yard game, with Mason at QB the first time. And so, I think that this defense, when healthy, can do some damage. And I think that the reason why maybe perhaps they, were not as healthy as they could have been late in the season was probably because of the amount of work they got earlier in the season due to the lack of the offense, possessing the ball. It was 3 and out. And I think that led to fatigue and injury and things like that. So, I do think that the Steelers, maybe possibly could be one or two positions from really being a competitor. And, I think that some of that's going to be on the defensive side. There's a lot of holes on the defensive side. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see. So do you think that if there's no announcement before the Super Bowl, as far as an offensive coordinator, do you think that means that their choice is one of the coordinators that are participating in the Super Bowl or one of the coaches?
It seems logical only because of the Steelers knew they needed an offensive coordinator back when they relieved Matt Canada of his duties. It ain't like it just happened at the end of the year. I mean, they had weeks. Now, I know you can't do a lot of preparation as far as Tomlin and them. They're busy in season, but the Rooneys and Omar Khan and Waddle, them guys could be saying, okay, this guy makes sense. This guy doesn't. This guy, And now you can't start communicating with these guys until they're available. Some guys are still in the playoffs, obviously. So it makes sense that if it was somebody from a team that didn't make the playoffs, they would have already had more interviews. They've had 2 that we know of for sure. They supposedly did some virtually, but I don't know because Robertson said he never talked to the Steelers. And it was originally a report that he did virtually. So, until the Steelers say it officially, you can't believe everything, when you see a tweet. So, but yeah, I think that if we don't see, we might see another interview in the next 2 weeks. But I really believe that we're going to see in that after the Super Bowls when we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes of this. And I think that makes sense. If you look at what the Steelers want to do, you look at their roster construction currently, where they play, the style they need to play in the weather conditions of the North, especially that division. Bringing somebody in from that San Francisco tree makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that, like I said, I think it's a pretty big clue that the Steelers are waiting on somebody. I think that when it comes to someone you want, you take them. You don't give them the opportunity to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So, that just kind of tells me that these guys that they may have interviewed were probably guys that they may look at for other positions, such as, if Faulkner ends up leaving, they're going to need a running backs coordinator, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of these guys, I doubt to be in the offensive line coach. I don't think they are. But Munchak is a guy that's been rumored around that wants to make a coaching comeback. Do you think that once the hiring of the new coordinator happens, that the Steelers are going to release the other staff members that are on the offensive side of coaching?
Yeah, I think some of them, they probably already kind of talked to them. Like Sullivan moved on, and
Yeah.
Glenn Thomas moved on, and different people, because I think they told him the handwriting's kind of on the wall. When you hire a new offensive coordinator, you want to let him put his staff together. And, the Steelers can be like, well, Faulkner, unless he gets a better offer to, let's say, be an OC, because he's respected around the league. I think they would try to see if the new offensive coordinator could work with Faulkner like that. Because let's say it's Kubiak or Greasy, both of them are more passing game coordinators. And the running game plan and schemes they're going to bring are going to come from Shanahan tree. And which Harris is not a great fit for outside zone, as we already know. And him and Warren both work really well between the tackles. So you might want to keep Faulkner around. He's done a good job, and he can help be the running game coordinator, which is he has history and experience with. So, yeah, I think we're going to see that. I would like to see the running back coach, as you know. I'm all on Hines Ward for 24. I'd like to see Hines Ward come in, and they need discipline. They need guidance. They need somebody who knows the Steeler way and is going to demand respect. We know how great Hines Ward was, and we know he bleeds black and gold. And I think he can help take this wide receiver room to the next level. So, but yeah, I think that we'll know a lot more. Again, that's why I hope it's soon, because it's going to impact the coaching staff. It's going to impact roster construction. I think it's going to impact Tomlin's extension. I think he's waiting. He's making sure that this time he has more say.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I would be excited also about Hines Ward coming back. I think that he would, bring that Steelers way. You know what I'm saying? Yep. And because I think that the physicality is there, the attitude is there from the receivers. The ability is there. It's just kind of focusing in that ability and that frustration and that, wanting to compete in the right direction. And I think that maybe perhaps, Ward can acquire that. But, the last thing we're going to talk about is, now that you brought up former players possibly being coaches, Mike Mitchell has been a guy that's been rumored to be coming back to the Pittsburgh Steelers to replace the defensive backs coach. What are your thoughts on him coming back in that role?
Well, I don't want to judge Mitchell as a coach by my opinions of him as a player. Towards the end, when Mitchell first came in, he was a very enthusiastic hitter. So anybody that knows me knows that I love that. I love the guys that you don't have to say sick 'em, you got to say whoa. And he was always up for a big hit. He loved to really try to knock guys out, which you could do back in the day when he played. The problem come in that when he would celebrate making a tackle 15, 20 yards downfield, and it was his guy that he didn't have good coverage on, and then he would tackle him, and then he'd jump up and celebrate like he made a 4th and 1 stop. That got on my nerves. And if you don't believe me, go back and look at highlights. A lot of his big, joyous celebrations happened after what I call failures. Mm-hmm. You make a stop on 3rd down, you make a stop on 4th down. That's when you celebrate. TJ Watt celebrate his sack celebration. That's awesome because it happens after a sack. It ain't like, if Devin Bush would have followed the play down like he used to do, if somebody else made a tackle and then he started celebrating, you'd be pissed off, right? That's kind of like how I felt about Mitchell at times as a player. But he's done a really good job with Indianapolis. If you notice their quarterbacks, they had a lot of rookies last year and second-year players, and they were a good secondary. So I think he's got the credentials, and he's a guy with experience and ties to Pittsburgh. So if he did come back, I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, yeah. Neither would I. I think that he's a passionate guy as well. He comes from that time where the Steelers' way was important, and I think that that's important. Um, how the Steelers do things or how they did things in the past is important to be instilled here with this team because it is a bunch of young guys, a bunch of guys that are looking for a leader, especially on offense. And I think that when you get a Hines Ward or you get a Mike Mitchell, that you're going to bring that leadership alongside with them and the familiarity of the building and tradition of how the Steelers operate and what they expect and what the standard is. And so I would be excited for both players if they ended up getting that as the possibility. But I want to thank everybody that's been tuning in. Please hit that like button and subscribe. If you're listening to this on the Apple Podcast, give us a 5-star rating and everything that you need to do. But with all that said, I appreciate everybody. Shannon, take us out.